Hello and welcome to Focus on Israel, which looks at the Holy Land. I'm Paul Calvert. Psalm 106 verse 48 from the New King James Bible says this: Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting, and let all the people say, Amen. Praise the Lord. I'm with Heidi Berger, the founder and president of the Foundation for Genocide Education. Now, Heidi, what is the Foundation for Genocide Education?
We're a foundation that began in 2014. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and my mother used to go into schools to tell her story. She wrote a book called Witness to Horror. And before I started the foundation, she was telling me that she was going into high schools and seeing students that never had heard about the Holocaust, that didn't know even what the word genocide meant. And I said, that's not possible. And she said, yes, it is. So before she passed, she asked me to go to one of her presentations, and I did. And I was just amazed at how these students, these high school students, embraced her, embraced what she had to say, understood what she was talking about. And for a lot of them, it was the first time learning about it, and for the teachers as well. So I decided after she passed to continue her work, and I started going into schools, high schools in Quebec and in Ontario at that time. And yes, she was right. There are high school students, even today, that really, especially today, don't understand what genocide means. And a lot of them know very little about the Holocaust. So teachers are afraid to teach it. They don't know how to teach it. They don't have the training. And they're also, in these times, especially afraid to teach it, as I mentioned. So I started this foundation with the Quebec Ministry of Education. I persuaded, which is not an easy feat, considering we live in the province of Quebec, I persuaded them to produce a guide for teachers on how to teach genocide, to make it easier for teachers on how to teach it. And they said, you'll never do this just with the Holocaust. Not happening. I said, okay, so how do we get this done? They said, let's do the 9 recognized UN genocides of the 20th century. I said, great, including the First Nations. I said, great, I would like that very much. So with the collaboration of 2 researchers and writers in Quebec, and ourselves, my foundation, and also some input from the Holocaust Museum, we have this guide now called Studying Genocide, and in it, this makes it very easy for teachers how to teach it. Now, I'm a former filmmaker, and a teacher at Concordia University, so we produced all the testimonials from the different genocides to put into the guide. And everything's available online. No teacher has to pay for it. And it's been a very big success in Montreal, in Quebec, and Ontario, and even in the United States. But if I can add one story that touches my heart, we got a call from Namibia about a year ago saying nobody knows about their genocide there. Nobody knows about it. I didn't even know about it. I sort of knew what there was in our guide because Namibia is a UN-recognized genocide. When I heard what happened there and how the Germans used the country to sort of experiment with concentration camps, this was before the Second World War, I was amazed. And I'm so proud that it's part of our book, part of our guide, and I'm also proud that they, because of us, are now teaching about the genocide that happened there in their high school. So I have to say that warms my heart. Now, because of the times that we're in, because of the extreme anti-Semitism, we've changed our presentations. We have presentations of survivors of the Holocaust, children of survivors, and even grandchildren going into high schools. But now we've had to change it because of what happened after October. And we now teach about anti-Semitism using the presentations as a way to show students, to make them understand exactly what anti-Semitism is. Past anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism through the war, and of course present-day anti-Semitism, of which we here in Canada we're experiencing a great deal of it. So that's really the foundation wrapped up. I can also include other things that we've been doing at a later time in the interview.
Yeah. Why is there so much fear for teachers about teaching the Holocaust?
I think because it's a very difficult, they don't have the training. They don't get training of how to teach it, and it's daunting for them. So I think the fact they don't have the training makes it very difficult, especially in these times now. Oh my God, it's like, thank God that we have guide for them, and thank God we have so many children of survivors going into schools to help them teach it as well with the stories of their parents or grandparents. And no, it's a difficult subject to teach. So they need the extra help. A lot of teachers think they'll read Anne Frank with their class and bang, they've done it. They've taught the Holocaust. But it's not so. Obviously, they have to learn about the steps leading to genocide. And in that way, they will develop the critical thinking they need to really understand it and to really understand what happened during the Holocaust.
How many schools do you go into, and what sort of age do you speak to?
The age, usually grade 10 and 11, which is 15 to 17 years old. You know why? Because our stories are quite difficult to hear, a lot of them, especially my mom's story. And so we prefer to go with the older grades. But now there's a demand for younger grades. So we're using the stories that aren't so graphic, that aren't so, because even my mother's testimonial, she talks a lot about a lot of things that are disturbing, that only an older high school student could really accept and understand. But now we're starting to go into younger grades with other Holocaust stories.
I imagine a lot of the kids have lots of questions after you've done a presentation.
I'll tell you what happens after my story. They don't say a word. Wow. It takes them a while to absorb what they've heard. Because my mother is very eloquent. She was interviewed by Spielberg Shoah Foundation and the Montreal Holocaust Museum. And listen, she saw at 17, she saw her father and brother taken away from her. At 18, she saw her best friend raped and murdered when she was hiding. And I think between 18 and 19 years old, she witnessed her mother machine gunned as she was hiding in an attic. So these stories are quite emotional. And so for the first 10 minutes, there's silence. They're absorbing it. And then afterwards, there are questions, usually a lot about me growing up here in Canada. I was the only child of my family that was born in Canada. So a lot about that, a lot about how they survived. How did they do it? And then they also ask questions, my mother talks about that there were, a few people that hid them, that took the chance. One Nazi hid them. There was a patient of my dad that hid them, and one other person. And so they talk about that as well. Like how were they able to take that chance and hide my parents? So the questions are interesting. They come out after a while. Some students are afraid to ask questions in front of their peers. So they'll come up to me after. All the presenters have allowed the students to come out after if they don't want to ask questions in front of their peers. But I can't begin to tell you how many hugs there are afterwards. And the appreciation of the teachers and of the students that they heard the story and that they understand it is profound. So I am a big believer, whether we send in a Rwandan survivor into a school, First Nation survivor, we're working now a Cambodian, we had an Armenian, now we're doing children of survivors and grandchildren, how important that is today for them to be able to understand the Holocaust, but more important, anti-Semitism.
How did your mother actually manage to escape the Holocaust?
Running and hiding in forests, cellars, and barns.
Wow.
That's a lot of that. And my dad at that time was a dentist, and he was able to work for the Nazis. They had an Ausweis that brought them out of the ghetto and then back into the ghetto. You just have to read my mother's book, Witness to Horror.
Do people understand as well that the Holocaust actually affects the next generation as well?
Yes, it does, because we do talk about it a little in our presentations. But really what we do in our presentations, we put it to them to understand that this generation has to be able to talk about it, to defend any anti-Semitism that they witness in their classrooms. We've reversed that in a way that we have made it their responsibility. Every student sitting there in the classroom has to understand that they're responsible as well, and that it is up to them to spread, to talk to their peers about anti-Semitism and to help them understand what's happening.
So those people who've suffered with genocide, is this a form of healing, the fact that they can actually go into the schools and speak about this?
Very much so. In the beginning, especially with the Rwandans, because these are actual survivors, for the Rwandans, for example, they're so hesitant to tell their stories. And it takes them a while to be able to get into the schools and to talk about it. And they all have said the same thing, that how it is healing for them to tell their story, and how it's the first time in their lives that they've put together their stories and told them. For us, for the people like myself, it definitely is always feels, for me personally, like I'm doing something extremely important. And that's telling my parents' story and helping students understand exactly what happened. And yeah, it definitely is.
How worried are you about the rise in anti-Semitism in Canada today?
Oh my God, very worried. The stats keeps going up and up and up. I mean, in the latest survey here in Canada, June 2026, a third of Canadians believe that anti-Semitism has become more acceptable in the country. And just over a fifth agreed with the statement, Israel military's actions in Gaza justify negative attitude towards Jewish people in Canada.
I think everyone today knows that you can't be anti-Semitic, but has anti-Zionism now become the anti-Semitism, and that's what's causing the rise in anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. But, that's what it is now. That's exactly what it is. And the repercussions is all over the world.
Does that make your work even more important?
Absolutely. But we have restrictions now. Before October, we could have talked more about it, but after October, now we have restrictions from schools not to say anything about Gaza, not to bring that up, because teachers are afraid, principals are afraid of questions coming up. And in the beginning, when it first happened, I used to talk about Gaza and Hamas being a terrorist, anti-Semitic organization that wants to get rid of every Jew, me and everybody here in the audience and everybody in the world. And then I was told by many, many schools, and now this has to be followed, because we have to if we want to get into the schools to talk about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, we have to follow by the principals and teachers' guide. We are not allowed to mention Gaza, not allowed to mention anything political. The story is just about the Holocaust, and we're allowed to talk about anti-Semitism, but not outside that box. Because, listen, well, we've gotten refused into a few schools because of who we are, and the Muslim parents don't want us because, hey, if you're here to talk about the Holocaust, then we should have a prison at Palestine, So for us, it's more important. Yeah, we'll follow your guidelines, but we want to get into schools. So last year we spoke to alone 6,000 students just in Montreal and Ottawa.
Do you get pushback when you try to get into the schools?
Pushback, yeah. It's hard work these days to get into schools. We have a great reputation. because our presentations are so professional. But yeah, we have to call the schools many times. We have to be very persistent and very aggressive. So when we're told that we're a few Muslim parents in one school said, Heidi Berger is a racist because she believes in Israel, and she's weaponizing her mother's story on the Holocaust to explain the situation in Israel and Gaza. So we've gotten things like that, but comments like that. But for the most part, I have to say that we are really one of the foremost educators in Montreal and Quebec, definitely in Ottawa, about the Holocaust with our live presentations. There's nothing like hearing the story from a child of a survivor, a grandchild of a survivor, to a student. I don't think anything can compete with that. I think that's the most important way to convey our message.
Is it your mother that's inspired you to do this work?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she was in a lot of schools. She even went to Hawaii, where my other brother lives, and she spoke to like 2,000 soldiers many times in Hawaii and at Pearl Harbor. And she definitely was an inspiration to me and one of my brothers, definitely.
It seems really sad that what your mother went through, and yet we came 70 years later, and in one sense, we're still fighting and battling the same thing. There's maybe not the killing of Jews in some ways, although we have seen that in the UK. But we haven't really changed, have we? Have we really learned anything?
Unfortunately, no. Yeah. It's very disturbing. It's really, really disturbing. But we all know anti-Semitism has always been there, like hiding a bit under that first layer. And then obviously October brought it out the next day. It's very disturbing after all our parents went through and grandparents, that this is still happening.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you do?
It's GenEd, GenEd.org.
And they can see your mother's book on there and videos as well, can they?
Yes, and they could see all the other incredible work we're doing, because we can't stop where we are, because now we're getting older and it's getting harder and harder for us to get to schools. So we started a program called Living Links, which is in 15 cities right now across the U.S. and in Toronto. And we're training actually the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors to share their families' histories with schools, community groups, and broader audiences. So we're doing that in Montreal this fall. And also we started another incredible program that I had never heard about. It started in the United States, in already 30 American cities. Of course, the States is way ahead of Canada, but it's called Student to Student. And I first heard about it when I called my granddaughter, who lives in Memphis, Tennessee, and I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I'm going to talk to a senior class in a school in Nashville." I said, "What are you doing?" So she said, "Well, it's a program where Jewish teens visit public and private high schools to share their diverse traditions with non-Jewish students." So this program is to counter dangerous anti-Semitic stereotypes, which we all know, and ignorance through a peer-to-peer dialogue. While at the same time, this is empowering our Jewish youth to become more confident ambassadors for our community. And we've seen how this works. So, for example, they'll bring a challah to explain them Friday night, Shabbat, we have challah. They'll bring them a shofar. This is what we, blow on, have on Rosh Hashanah. And so it's basically peer-to-peer. And it's a very successful program, and we're going to start this in Montreal as well.
Does it feel like you're being like Esther from the Bible, standing for such a time as this with everything that's going on, and we need organizations like you to stand against anti-Semitism?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and we need more. And we need our Jewish different community organizations to be very united, working together, not separately, but working very strongly together. And yeah, definitely, definitely. Sometimes I think, I just think I wish there was more of us going out there in these very troubling times.
Mm-hmm. Well, Heidi, thank you very much for sharing today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.